I'm Art Harris in New Orleans at the United Astrological Congress with two of the leading stars of astrological education, where people can go who are interested in astrology to learn more about it. Once upon a time you could major, you can major in English, you can major in history. Why can't you major in astrology?
The way the U.S. has its educational program, colleges have two levels. They get authorized by the state, then accredited in a federal accreditation. And the accrediting bodies require subject matter experts. So if you're a brand new field in higher education, they don't have subject matter experts in astrology. And they also don't believe that it's a subject worthy of attention.
It's not a science, even though many of your colleagues can point to actual events and correlate what's going on upstairs with what happens in people's lives and in this world, right? Is that?
There's a long history in academics of actually studying astrology and teaching astrology, but from a historical standpoint, astrology has fallen under the category of the history of science because, after all, until the 17th century, it was part of the history of science. For a long time, it was an integral part of the academic curriculum in Europe. And basically, what happened was this process broke down a few hundred years ago. So at that time, it was there. The people who study it now are perfectly capable of studying it, but until about 15 or 20 years ago, if you didn't start every one of your books or publications by ridiculing astrology in present tense, it wasn't considered proper academic form. And so what we hit up against with Kepler College was a serious case of discrimination against both what we were attempting to do and about the very idea that astrology could be taught academically by people who actually might practice it, as opposed to people who made it very clear that they did not practice it.
Practiced down through the ages, it has been studied and used by different pharaohs and kings and people like Nancy Reagan, right? So it's used in the stock market. So how do you bridge that gap?
Well, of course, as educators, we have to say education. And so ultimately, I mean, Kepler was an attempt. We were open for 10 years until we ran into some red tape issues relating to the accreditation process. It will keep happening. And eventually, there will be an institution that succeeds on a more permanent basis than we were able to.
In the meantime, how can somebody out there who gets a little interested in this and finds it useful and interesting, how can they learn about it now?
Well, there's a number of different schools out there that are trying to raise the bar on astrological education. Kepler has transformed its program into a certificate program. And the idea of astrological education, many people find kind of an oxymoron, how can that be? What astrology is in reality, as opposed to the newspaper horoscope or whatever, is two very different things.
How so? Tell me.
Well, the newspaper horoscope is entertainment. I mean, it takes one particular aspect of the sun position throughout the course of the year, and in actual astrological practice, you're utilizing all the planets. You're utilizing a much broader examination of how they interact with each other. So it has, and it's not just here's a prediction for the day. It's much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I started out obviously as a newspaper junkie, decoding Sidney Omar, and now here we are. I've actually, used astrology in the past, and so you could say, here I am coming out of the closet to learn more and meet some of the leading lights. And so my question would be, how can others? I mean, I don't have time to go major in astrology right now, but others may want to pick it up. And
there are multiple levels to that answer. In most communities, there are astrologers who are teaching astrology in a kind of an ad hoc way, the same way you could go to a martial arts school which also, and I find martial arts a kind of a useful analogy, because like astrology at this point, it's basically unlicensed. It's run by people who are enthusiasts for the material and who have gone through a process of learning the material and then are conveying it to other people. So you've got this ad hoc process, which is available in almost any city of any size. There are more formal schools, of which Kepler is one. I also teach at a place in Cincinnati called the Midwest School of Astrology. Some of them, like Kepler, are online. Some of them, like Midwest School, are actually in a location. And they have varying degrees of complexity to their curriculum, depending on how deep you want to get into it.
So say, you are a consumer who wants some advice. You don't know any astrologist, or you see some and they're advertised, and you call one. How do you pick an astrologer? How can you quote check them out? Is that possible?
No.
Okay.
To be totally honest, no.
So it's word of mouth?
It's word of mouth. I mean, you can Google. I mean, it's easy. The problem isn't finding an astrologer. The problem is evaluating whether it's the right astrologer for you. There are so many ways that a consultation can occur. There's what almost every astrologer does is what would be called a basic natal consultation. But what is in that is so variable, because there are astrologers who want to take it from a spiritual perspective or a psychological perspective or a predictive perspective. So you're getting into that person's philosophy of how they're using astrology. Then there's specialty ways of working with astrology. I, for example, work in a field called horary, which is the process of asking a particular question, and it doesn't involve the birth chart. There's a style of astrology called electional, where you're using astrology to pick a time to sell a house, to buy a house, to have a surgical procedure. So there are particular uses of astrology, and it would depend entirely on what your goal in that astrological reading would be as to who your astrologer should be.
So ask those questions, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, ask questions, interview the astrologer before you go and take a reading.
For example, what would you ask?
Well, you would want to know what type of astrology they do, as Lee was mentioning. What's their focus in giving a reading? You would want to know what they've studied. How long have they studied? Have they done any formal education, or have they done just a teacher
Charts.
here, a teacher there, or reading, or never taken a class, so that you can have a chance to evaluate for yourself whether there seems to be a match.
I think it's also important to start to think about why you want the reading in the first place, because people go through all sorts of life processes. When you're younger, your obsession is your relationships, and then your obsession is your kids. And somewhere along the way, especially lately, your obsession is your job. Sooner or later, health will intrude. It's all these issues that I think are very important for the client to say, okay, well now, I need to know what I'm going to be doing with my job over the next 5 years. And make sure that that's something that the astrologer that you're proposing to go to can really work with.
And then say, okay, is your path the right one for you? Why and why not? And you may want to consider this or that. And that's a good astrologer in that area would be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. What would be your advice to the neophyte astrologer who? What book should they read first?
That is a very hard one.
Linda Goodman Sun Signs?
No, actually not. Because I think the issue is, when you're on the outside looking at the astrology columns, what you should probably know at that point is that constitutes perhaps 1 to 3% of the subject area of astrology. If the first place you go is a sun sign book, you might get the impression that that's the whole thing. The answer to which, there is no one book. And it's like any other field. If you want to study religion, what's the one book you should read? Well, it depends on whether you're a Christian, a Buddhist, a Hindu, or whatever. There is no one book you should read. It depends on what your interest is, what your philosophy is. where you're coming in life, perhaps how old you are and what your issues are. All of those play into what is the right entry point.
What's Kepler's, is there an online,
We have, yeah, everything is online for our
what's your
courses.
link? What is, if somebody wanted to Google,
Kepler.edu.
okay, and Lee?
And
ha-
we,
I'm
oh,
sorry, go
I was just
ahead.
going to say, we also have just a very short, small, free little introduction to what astrology is all about that people can look at, and at least if they don't have any background, get a little bit more of a flavor.
Lee, if somebody wanted to read your books, how would they find them?
They can find them through me. My link is leelehman.com. And otherwise Amazon or their local bookseller, hopefully.
How are they selling?
I haven't a clue. I've just published 3, and I won't get the royalties on them for another few months, so I'm in the dark.
Well, good luck. Well, good luck. This is one of the crowning moments for astrology is spreading the word and trying to educate students and consumers, and we've just spent a little time with 2 of the leading educators in the field, and I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.